This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner, and here are tonight's top stories. A powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake in Russia triggers tsunamis that hit Japan and Hawaii, sparking evacuations all across the Pacific. Shanghai evacuates hundreds of thousands of people as tropical storm Kolme lashes eastern China with high winds and heavy rain. China, hosting a meeting of officials from Thailand and Cambodia, seeks a constructive role in finding a peaceful solution to the ASEAN neighbours' border dispute. The world's biggest automaker, Toyota, outsmarts tariff uncertainties with record global sales on the back of strong demand for hybrids. South Korea's top business leaders join government officials in Washington for a last-gasp effort to pull off a tariff deal. Also ahead on East Asia Tonight, a Japanese power company is taking the first steps towards building a new nuclear reactor, the country's first since the 2011 Fukushima meltdown. But today's tsunami rekindling safety concerns among the public. And China carves out more than $12 billion for a new childcare subsidy budget. It's to boost flagging birth rates, and we're taking a deep dive into Beijing's latest attempt to address a growing demographic crisis. Countries that border the Pacific Ocean are on high alert following an 8.8 magnitude quake that struck off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula today. Russian authorities have declared a state of emergency for its far eastern Sakhalin region, situated near the quake epicenter. Tsunami waves up to 5 meters high have destroyed buildings and flooded the region. Authorities say there have been no major injuries reported. Let's go further south. In Japan, waves of up to 1.3 meters high have been sighted along Japan's Pacific coast. Officials have suspended ferry services connecting Hokkaido to Japan's main island ahead of the wave's arrival. Now, some bullet train services and local train operations have also been cancelled. Nuclear plants along the country's Pacific coast have also suspended operations, with no abnormalities reported so far. Tsunami alerts also currently in place from Hokkaido to Fukushima prefectures. Japan's Met Agency says the warnings are expected to stay in place until tomorrow.
で津波の現象ですが、長い時間繰り返し津波は襲ってきます。でまた第1波より後に来る波が大きいことがありますので、津波警報等が解除されるまでは、避難を継続していただきたいと考えております。
China, meanwhile, has lifted a warning for Shanghai region and Zhejiang province. Earlier, authorities had warned of waves that could reach up to a meter high. Across the ocean in Hawaii, receding sea levels seen earlier at Oahu and Kauai Islands have initially prompted concerns, but authorities have since downgraded the alert level to an advisory. The state's governor, nonetheless, is urging residents to remain alert.
Right now, we still have not seen any wave activity come past the Big Island. That's important. Until we see what happens on the Big Island and the full wraparound of the islands, we won't feel that we are in a position to start seeing and saying that we're kind of in the clear. We expect to be about 2 to 3 hours at least until we can call all clear. So far, though, at the moment, so good.
Across the U.S. West Coast, Californian authorities have issued evacuation warnings for boat dwellers. Local media reports that the first waves hit Alaska and are expected to reach Oregon, Washington and California soon. Pacific Island nations, the Philippines, Indonesia and Pacific-facing Central and South American nations also on alert. Well, let's get more now. CNN's Michio Ishida is joining us live. Michio, first question, any damage that you can update us on from the tsunamis?
Well, Jill, let me give you one piece of good news. tsunami warning has been downgraded to an advisory for the Kanto region, or the area south of Kanto, which includes Tokyo. That means from up to 3 meters high tsunami, it's up to 1 meters high. So far, we have not heard of major damage from tsunamis. We have seen flooded ports. A 1.3 meter tsunami was recorded in Kuji Port in Iwate Prefecture. It's a rich fishing area, and they have large fishing nets on seabed. The force from 1.3 meter tsunami wave can damage such gears, but fishermen cannot check out their gears as tsunami warnings are still out. And I recall small tsunamis in the past ruining oyster farms, which Iwate and neighboring Miyagi are famous for. Now, one person died while evacuating. Local media say a 58-year-old woman fell off a cliff while driving. Elderly people who evacuated in Hokkaido were treated for heat strokes. And in other parts of Japan, temperature has hit a record high. Tamba in Hyogo recorded 41.2 degrees Celsius, and Kyoto exceeded 40. Tsunamis continue to be observed all over Japan, from northernmost main island of Hokkaido to southernmost Okinawa. Sendai Airport is closed, and as long as warnings stay in place, trains running near coastal areas are suspended. But Tokyo may resume its trains soon after tsunami warning has been downgraded. Factories, convenience stores, and other businesses operating near the coast have basically closed for the day.
Michio, what are authorities doing to mobilize efforts to protect people?
Well, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi gave a news conference this afternoon. He repeated the government's stance, calling for the public to seek refuge and on higher ground to secure safety. He said tsunamis can grow bigger and bigger, and tsunami warnings could be in place the entire day. But for some parts of Japan, that has been downgraded. So far, local media reports indicate many are avoiding the coastal area. Many remember the March 11, 2011 big tsunami, which was triggered by a magnitude 9 earthquake and took thousands of lives. And according to the Internal Affairs Ministry, evacuation was issued to up to 2 million people in 21 prefectures.
All right. Thank you so much for the update there. CNA's Michio Ishida. She is live from Tokyo, but we want to stay on this topic and get more insights into Japan's earthquake preparedness. And for that, we're joined by Professor Rabbit Shaw. He is professor in Graduate School of Media and Governance at Keio University's Shonan Fujisawa campus. Professor Shaw, welcome. When we think of tsunamis, we have a reference point of 2011 in all our minds. How was today's different from that?
Thank you very much. Actually, this is quite different than the 2011 East Japan earthquake and tsunami. In the previous tsunami, we felt the violent shaking in most of the coastal areas. So that's why it automated lots of evacuations. So people tried to run to the higher ground. But in this particular tsunami, there was almost very less shaking. Only little bit of shaking was felt in northern part of Hokkaido. But in most of the coastal area, Pacific coast, there are very less shaking. So there, the early warning becomes extremely, extremely important. So earlier we give the early warning, the better evacuation it happens. And the second point is the previous earthquake was more in that was in the winter, in the midday winter. And this is in the middle of the summer. And as you have heard, that there were very high heat. So many people were there in the coastal area, even in the early daytime, so around 8 or 9 times. So it needs lots of evacuation.
And yet, nearly 2 million people were placed under some sort of evacuation advisory. That's significant. What does it say about Japan's immediate response and preparedness?
I think Japan, after this 2011 earthquake and tsunami, we had 2 major aspects of the preparedness. One is on the physical infrastructure, where significant investment in the coastal infrastructure in terms of national resilience planning have been done. So we had multiple lines of defense like the coastal dike, coastal green belt, evacuation highland, and also upliftment of the coastal road. But there is another very important thing when we do the early warning system, and I personally have worked with many of the announcers, like the broadcasting media. Like earlier, it was a very calm and quiet way of giving the early warning. But nowadays, in the most of the broadcasting media, there is a sense of urgency, and virtually people were shouting, or the announcers were shouting that please evacuate, tsunami is approaching. So I think that sense of urgency has also become very strong. And there has been quite a bit of media training, actually, in most of the media broadcasting companies in Japan.
Yeah, so I guess communication has played a very large role in helping the culture of preparedness in Japan. But when you observe the strengths and the weaknesses, what can you tell us about the difference between now and 2011 when it comes to things like technology, for example?
I think, of course, technology has developed quite far, and in terms of early warning, especially, we now have multiple levels of early warning. One is, of course, we get it through the mobile phone. Then all the broadcasting media gives the early warning system. But then the most important thing is that we should not forget that in Japan there is a very high aging population who lives in the coastal area, and many of them still are not having the smartphones. So just only providing early warning through the smartphone and the digital media will not help. We need a combination of this digital media as well as the human network. And that's where I think the Japan's strength is, that blending of this digital as well as analog system for the early warning.
Interesting. You know, despite how far they've come in those areas, yet the ferries, the airport, rail, all disrupted in Japan's infrastructure. How resilient do you think its infrastructure is, and is enough being done to help it through these emergencies?
You see, I will say that there is never an enough preparedness. We always need to learn from each and every disaster. Yes, significant improvements have been made, both in terms of physical infrastructures, but also the social infrastructures. In terms of physical infrastructure, yes, there have been big investment in most of the coastal areas, as I mentioned, that in terms of lots of coastal dikes and upliftment of the roads and so on. But I think more important is having this education rails in the schools, or making prepare more aware about that. And one of the key lessons, what I can say, is now we try to develop this worst case scenario, and all the drills are performed visualizing the worst case scenario. What I say by the worst case scenario is, the earlier the disasters happen in the daytime. Of course, this event also happened in the daytime.
In the cover of darkness and things like that.
It could happen in the night.
Yes. So what do you think are some of the lessons that today's tsunami could perhaps be shared? What are the lessons that other Asian countries can take away from today?
The most important thing is that now, like, no coastal areas are possibly free of tsunami. We need to have, even if there is not a major active fault, but we need to prepare for the coastal hazards like tsunami. So that's the lesson number one. Lesson number two is, like, this happens actually, what we see nowadays, that it happens, there are many different types of disasters happening together. So as we heard that we are now having a very strong heat wave, and then a tsunami comes. So more the complex nature of the disasters become also quite critical. And then finally, the third point is, like, in the community, ultimately no government can protect its citizen. It's the combination of the public health, but also the self-help and the mutual help, which is the community's help. So how we can actually encourage the communities through different types of awareness raising program. I think that's a very, very important part.
Well, thank you so much, Rabit Shaw. He is professor in the Graduate School of Media and Governance at Keio University's Shonan Fujisawa campus. Thank you again. Shanghai has relocated more than 280,000 people and suspended hundreds of flights as the financial hub braces for tropical storm Kome. The downgraded typhoon made landfall today, lashing eastern China with strong winds and heavy rain. Rainfall of up to 100 millimeters, about a month's worth, is expected within a 6-hour period in Shanghai. Local municipal services say there may be potential flooding near the city centre. Authorities warn that at least 640 flights could be cancelled at Shanghai's 2 airports. Airports in nearby cities Ningbo, Wenzhou and Hangzhou also saw flight cancellations and diversions, with more than 75% of today's flights in Zhoushan called off. Local media reports that all ferry services in Shanghai have been cancelled. Drivers are told to limit speeds to less than 60 kilometres per hour on highways. The tropical storm made landfall earlier in Zhoushan, a port city in Zhejiang province. Forecasters say Kome could make another landfall closer to Shanghai later today. Coming up on East Asia tonight, HSBC's profits slide sharply for its second quarter with an impairment weighing on results. Later, top European car makers flagging tough times ahead on US tariffs and stiff competition from Chinese rivals. Hello everyone, time for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, European luxury car makers are painting quite a bleak outlook. What are they coming up against?
Well, Jill, it's largely the wider repercussions from President Trump's tariff policy, which has seen European car makers hit with higher import taxes this year, plus having to contend with tough competition in China. And while they are struggling, well, Japan's Toyota navigating trade headwinds with a flourish. The world's largest automaker posting record high output and sales for the first 6 months of the year. Global sales, including that of subsidiaries Daihatsu and Hino Motor, rose 7.4% on year to more than 5.5 million units between January and June. Production grew 8.8% to 5.5 million units during the period. Domestic output jumped 20% on year. Strong demand for hybrid vehicles in markets including North America, Japan and China, boosting numbers. A last-minute rush from customers to lock in purchases before President Trump's 25% tariffs on car imports also bolstering sales. Now, with the trade deal in place, with 15% duty on Japan's autos imported into the US, well, experts see Japanese car makers having an edge over rivals. Toyota share price in Tokyo climbed 14% on July 23rd in response to the deal. Nissan Motors taking a large hit in its quarterly results from the impact of US tariffs and lower sales volumes as it continues to restructure. Japan's third biggest automaker reported a loss for the quarter ending June of more than $500 million, though this was within expectations. It's forecasting narrower than average estimate loss of $1.2 billion for its first half, while withholding guidance for the full year. For this fiscal year, Nissan projecting sales of 3.25 million units. And that's despite a slump in sales in China of 27%, as well as a sizable fall in Japan of 11%. The company is seeking to restructure and has pledged to close 7 plants globally and to lay off 15% of its workforce. Nissan also shuttering its production at its historic Civac plant in Mexico by March next year as part of a major restructuring of its global operations. Established in 1966 as Nissan's first overseas factory, Civac has produced more than 6.5 million vehicles and contributed about 11% of Mexico's total output. The plant's operations will be consolidated with another facility. The closure reflects the company's plans to trim its global production sites and to reduce capacity. It wants to reduce its production sites to 10 from 17 and to scale back capacity. Earlier in July, Nissan announced that it would discontinue vehicle production at 2 plants in Kanagawa Prefecture, and that's south of Tokyo. Premium European car brands are cautioning of underwhelming results after being slammed by U.S. tariffs and tough competition from Chinese brands. German automaker Mercedes-Benz and Porsche scaling back profit expectations for the year, with U.S. tariffs hitting pricing and sales, and businesses in China fighting a fierce EV price war led by local brands. British luxury car maker Aston Martin also walking back its gross margin forecast a day after Stellantis warned that U.S. duties will weigh on the Jeep maker's already struggling North American business. After latest negotiations, the US and the EU agreed to the tariff rate on cars imported from the bloc to 15%, which is actually still far higher than the 2.5% levy before Trump's trade offensive. Worsening the impact of tariffs, while major Chinese automakers are expanding aggressively in Europe. BYD, for example, is building new factories in the continent and aims to have 1,000 stores in Europe by the end of 2025. At the same time, a fierce EV price war in China is eroding margins for the European players. Now, Tesla has reportedly signed a $4.3 billion deal with South Korea's LG Energy Solutions as it seeks to reduce reliance on Chinese imports. Now, LGES will be supplying energy system batteries produced at its U.S. factory in Michigan, according to sources familiar with the matter. LGES is one of the biggest battery makers in the world and also one of the few producers of lithium iron phosphate batteries in the US. The market has long been dominated by Chinese rivals such as CATL, which has strong business ties with Tesla. LGES announced this earlier this week that it secured a deal to supply the batteries over 3 years globally, but did not share more information. The battery maker said it's shifting its focus to storage batteries driven by the global surge in demand for data centers to train artificial intelligence. The firm is hoping that the move can help offset its sluggish EV demand. HSBC reports close to a 30% slide in pre-tax profits for the second quarter of the year. The bank says performance was hampered by impairment charges running into billions of dollars linked to a Chinese bank. Europe's biggest lender pre-tax profits slid to $6.3 billion from close to $9 billion in the same period last year. And that's on the back of revenue that came in close to the same level on year. HSBC saw a hike in operating costs due to its business restructuring, as well as increased spending and investment in technology. But the lender says the decline in profit was mainly due to impairment losses of some $2 billion related to its holdings in the Bank of Communications. The charge follows Beijing's recapitalization of HSBC earlier this year due to the slowdown in China's property sector and amid trade tensions with the US. In Hong Kong, shares closing 3.8% in the red despite announcing a share buyback scheme of some $3 billion. Shares in London currently 2.7% in the red. South Korea making a last-ditch push to cut a trade deal with the US ahead of the looming August 1st deadline. Seoul says that 3 cabinet-level officials have met with US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in Washington. Top business leaders also reportedly to be flying in to help lobby for a deal, including the chiefs of Samsung and Hyundai. The government has not given out details of the discussions, but the presidential office says negotiations are being held on areas including semiconductors, batteries, biotech, and shipbuilding. The latest meeting comes after reports that the U.S. Commerce Secretary had urged the South Korean team to bring their best and final offer to the table before their last meeting in Scotland. The pressure has been mounting on South Korea since Japan clinched a deal to cut U.S. tariffs to 15% last week. And that'll do it for business. Jill.
Good stuff. Thanks, Roland. China and Russia's navies are set to hold a joint maritime exercise next month. This will take place in the waters and airspace near the Russian city of Vladivostok.
联演结束后，双方部分参演兵力赴太平洋相关海域组织第6次海上联合巡航。这是中俄两军年度合作计划内安排，不针对第三方，与当前国际和地区局势无关。
Those drills come as Beijing continues to face pressure from the US and Europe over its relationship with Moscow amid the ongoing war in Ukraine. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said he warned Chinese officials during recent trade talks that purchases of sanctioned oil from Russia will lead to big tariffs. China's foreign ministry said it will take reasonable energy security measures based on its national interests. Coming up on East Asia tonight, what Japan has done to bolster its tsunami preparedness as today's massive wave alert triggers memories of its triple disaster 14 years ago. And a Japanese energy firm taking the initial steps to build the country's first new nuclear reactor since the Fukushima meltdown. Can the operator make a convincing case? Insights from an expert after the break. You're with East Asia tonight, and we have the headlines here. World's biggest automaker, Toyota, posting record high output and sales for the first 6 months of the year as customers rush to lock in their purchases before President Trump's 25% tariff on car imports hits. Shanghai hunkers down for tropical storm Komei's arrival, evacuating more than 280,000 residents and suspending hundreds of flights. The powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake in Russia triggers tsunamis that hit Japan and Hawaii, sparking evacuations across the Pacific. Well, today's tsunami warnings may invoke memories of one of Japan's darkest days. Back in March 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake triggered a massive tsunami that claimed nearly 20,000 lives and caused a meltdown at Fukushima nuclear plant. Since then, Japan has invested heavily in tsunami prevention and preparedness. Now, huge sea walls, some up to 15 meters high, have been built along vulnerable coastlines. They're designed to buffer tsunami waves and buy time for evacuation. Below the ocean seafloors, sensors track seismic activity and wave movement in real time. That data feeds into an advanced early warning system. Japan has also tightened building codes, new structures, and even older ones have been reinforced. Now, tsunami alerts are now faster, more accurate, and broadcast across multiple platforms, from phones to TVs and loudspeakers in the streets. Local communities regularly run evacuation drills to ensure everyone knows what to do when the time is tight. And Japan also works closely with other countries, particularly those with similar earthquake and tsunami risks, to enhance research and disaster prevention efforts. It's also tapping on tech, using AI for tsunami prediction and evacuation planning. All these changes post-2011 aimed to deliver earlier and more reliable warnings. And since these were put in place, Japan has responded to tsunamis with quicker alerts and far fewer casualties. For the first time since the meltdown at Japan's Fukushima power plant in 2011, an electricity provider is taking early steps that could lead to the eventual construction of a new nuclear reactor. Kansai Electric Power, or KEPCO, said it will resume a location survey ahead of feasibility studies for an innovative light water nuclear reactor. KEPCO is conducting the geological surveys at Mihama Nuclear Power Station in Fukui Prefecture. And if all goes according to plan, the power company will build its new reactor here to replace units 1 and 2 of the facility. The first and second Mihama reactors were shut 4 years after the Fukushima disaster, leaving just Unit 3 in operation. Now, the energy provider had already been looking into how to replace the aging facilities before the 2011 tsunami. Local media said a new reactor could cost $6.8 billion and take 20 years before it becomes operational. Let's get more insights. We're joined by Mika Obayashi, Director of Renewable Energy at the Institute Japan. Ms. Obayashi, welcome to the show. Now, after the Fukushima disaster, there was strong public resistance to nuclear power. What do you think has changed, whether it be socially or politically, that's allowing such a project to resurface now, given the legacy of 2011?
Yeah, good evening, and thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to join your program. Kansai Electric says they are doing this to deal with the huge increase of electricity demand from AI. But I have to say, as you already mentioned, the timing just doesn't meet up. If they start doing geological survey now, it is still going to take at least 15 to 20 years before they can get through the regulatory approvals and actually start building and operation reactors. In addition to the current government energy policy in favor of nuclear power, in the upper house election 10 days ago, the political parties and members of the parliament, backed by the company and its labor's union, picked up more seats in the parliament. So that probably made them feel like there is a political window opens to move now to the build up the new reactor. And then there's the company's head. Okay.
Oh, please carry on.
Yeah, and then there's the company's headache, what to do with the spent nuclear fuel. Fukushima Prefecture has been pushing hard for the company to secure a site outside the prefectural government for storage and disposal. By floating the idea of building new nuclear power plant, which would bring money and job into the local area, they may be hoping to ease the pressure and postpone the discussion on fuel disposal further. So this is the timing. They have to ease the discussion.
Yeah, that point that you brought up on the disposal, because, you know, Japan does face significant seismic risks, as we've seen. So if such a project were to continue, what should be the top safety and risk management considerations for a project like this? Because as you mentioned, we all remember that controversial removal of that treated nuclear waste into the ocean.
So you were talking about that nuclear, spent nuclear fuel disposal, or the kind of additional new nuclear power plant?
So what should be a key safety consideration in going forward?
For the nuclear disposal, you mean?
Well,
so the spent nuclear fuel.
If the survey continues to move forward into the nuclear reactor being revived.
Oh, okay. So they have to meet the kind of a new standards, new safety standards set by the nuclear regulatory agency. And then that is quite important. And then that they have to be ready for the, of course, that earthquake, but also for the kind of a terrorist attack or those kind of huge measures, the new ones. So the cost of the safety regulations will really soaring that comparing before the Fukushima accident, new reactors.
Okay, so the reactor is being framed as a very crucial step for Japan's economy and energy security. You expressed doubts a little earlier, but how does nuclear power in general fit into Japan's long-term energy strategy, even when you look at it from a sustainability point of view?
Yeah, actually, that if I see that globally, the nuclear power share is declining. Less than 10% of global electricity generation, besides renewables, exceeded more than 25%. And it's the same as Japan, like a nuclear reactor's share of the electricity mix is 5 to 8% that last year. And then the renewables really expanding a lot. For example, that if I see the PV sector, that Japan has already installed 100 gigawatt, almost 100 gigawatt of solar PV. And they are very much keen to explore the offshore wind power. It will be decided to 45 gigawatt by 2040 as a kind of a pipeline. So I think that the renewables can catch up and cover the electricity demand increase that from now on, besides the nuclear power.
Well, do you think Japan, on a whole, is doing enough to support the scaling up of renewables, or are we seeing maybe a return to old energy habits with renewable energy being almost sidelined?
Yeah, I think that there are kind of some different views, like nuclear promotion and renewable energy promotion. But I think that the current announcement related to the nuclear power is to maintain existing jobs and workforce and existing industry. But the renewable energy is a kind of a future investment to support the future generation and climate change discussions. So the new industries and the new companies, for example, the IT companies, they want to have the renewable energy resources for their electricity use. So the additional electricity consumption could be met with the renewable energy production, and then at the same time that it is really wanted by the new companies that who are very active in the global market.
We'll leave it there, and we thank you, Mika Obayashi, Director of Renewable Energy Institute, Japan. Coming up on East Asia Tonight, China unveils childcare subsidies worth billions of dollars to boost its flagging birth rate. Why are people choosing to have less children? And will handing out cash work? Find out when we speak with an expert in just a moment. China has set an initial budget of 90 billion yuan, or $12.5 billion for its new nationwide childcare subsidies this year. It's all part of the country's latest push to boost its birth rate and address the looming demographic crisis.
育儿补贴是新中国成立以来首次大范围、普惠式、直接性向群众发放的民生保障现金补贴，是一项惠民利民的重大措施。
Officials released more details today after announcing annual subsidies of about $500 for every child under the age of 3 earlier this week. This will apply retroactively from the 1st of January this year. About 90% of the costs will be covered by the central government. Applications will open in late August. Last year, China had about 9.5 million births, and that's half of 2016, when the one-child policy ended. The nation further relaxed limits on having a third child in 2021, but that has not moved the needle much. China's population shrank by close to 1.4 million in 2024, marking 3 straight years of decline.
那么人口是一个慢变量，受到很多因素的影响，包括育儿补贴制度在内的生育支持的政策措施的作用，也需要长期的观察。我们将在实施过程中持续跟踪。 全面评估。
For more on China's efforts to boost its birth rate, we now speak with Dr. Ye Liu. She is the reader in International Development at King's College London. Welcome to the show. You know, this marks China's first ever central level nationwide cash handouts to households. Is a bit different from the government's previous approaches, isn't it?
Yes. It's the first time the government implement the cash transfer as a child subsidy. It's definitely a step in the right direction to provide the family with some childcare cost support.
Well, the government has not wanted to go the monetary way, but based on what you've heard so far, will these latest child subsidies do anything to move the needle to reverse China's population issues?
I think this is a really welcome step forward. However, I'm not, let's be clear, I'm not convinced that this policy alone will address China's population issues. No single policy, however well intended, will reverse decades-long demographic trends.
Well, we have had some reactions from the young people in Shanghai to the subsidies that they've been presented. Why don't we have a listen to what they're saying?
我觉得如果真的生孩子的话，可能这点补贴不是，一个不是很吸引人，而且它也没有到一个就是非常支持的一个作用，就是还是因为生孩子开销还是挺大的，尤其是在上海。
钱是一个问题，再一个就是小孩生出来谁带的问题。那是不是比如在家附近会有多一些这种国家多一些这种对于托班的一些力度扶持？
我觉得应该完善劳动法，对，完善劳动法，让年轻人有时间、有精力去陪孩子，有金钱去陪孩子，这才是最重要的。
这个东西还是要靠自己的观念。 对啊，但是这种小的政策也会鼓励到啊，就是周围的人也会给他说的啊。
Well, some netizens on Chinese social media have lamented that the subsidy isn't enough to cover the cost of raising a child, while others say it may have a greater impact in so-called second and third tier cities, where the cost of living is lower. Dr. Liu, what do you think? Will this latest push by the Chinese government actually help reverse the country's population decline?
I think this policy alone will not reverse the population decline. And some of your interviewees already mentioned the wide range of issues young people and young family care about. For instance, affordable housing, job insecurity, and some of the costs varied across big cities and tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities. So 300 yuan renminbi per month will be insufficient for those, very expensive cities. But apart from cash transfer, young people are facing a wider range of issues. We can see, young people in universities, they are increasingly reluctant to get married, to date, and even to have children. So I think at the core of this issue is a lack of trust and a lack of optimism. So the recent scandal in a nursery in Tianshui, Gansu, where over 200 children were poisoned with lead-contaminated food. This kind of scandal is not just a one-off incident. It has been going on for decades. So Chinese families do not trust institutions, governments, and markets to safeguard their children's well-being and welfare. And that's just one side of the issue. Another side of the issue, young people, they don't have a sense of optimism like those like me from Balingho faced when we were growing up. We were first generation of one-child policy, and we had a lot of opportunities, job opportunities, education opportunities. But young people, those born after 2000, they do not have this kind of, hope to reach upward social mobility, for instance, through education. Lack of optimism, lack of trust, the fundamental root issue of China's population decline.
I hear what you're saying. Would you think that, in the bigger cities, what about the smaller cities, the second or third tier cities, for example? Do you think they might respond? Because some of the local governments are offering, for example, in Inner Mongolia's capital, Hohhot, they're offering what? $14,000 for a third child in those cities where the cost of living is lower. Do you see evidence that it might work?
I have seen, and it's worth noting that the childcare subsidies have been piloted across 20 provinces in the last 5 years. In some smaller cities, particularly tier 3, tier 4 cities where childcare cost is low, we have seen some spikes in birth rates. But it's still too early to predict that this kind of cash transfer will boost the confidence in families having more children. So from your interviewees, some of the young couples mentioned, how about, society being a child-friendly society? How about we care about looking after our children? How about we respect parents' responsibilities? So I think it's still a long way to go. It needs a sustained and holistic approach to address this kind of not just population issue, about raising a child.
Yeah, what about the differences that you're seeing between China's case and, say, other countries like South Korea and Japan who have similar flatlining birth rates and hyper-aging societies? Anything they can learn from that?
I just returned from fieldwork in South Korea. I've seen some really striking similarities between China and South Korea. I think the issue is gender relations. So we have seen China and South Korea where younger generation of women who have, achieved much higher level of education than previous generations. However, despite their qualifications, young women in China, they still face entrenched gender norms, patriarchal gender, cultural codes in the workplace. At the same time, young women still burnt the childcare responsibility at home. So it's still back to what I discussed earlier about trust. So the women do not trust the government in upholding genuine gender equality, and young women do not trust their male partners will share the childcare responsibilities. So it's still back to the problem. But China is very different from South Korea. China will become old before China becomes rich if the population decline continues. So that will have a serious economic consequence for China's economic ambitions in the future.
We do appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Dr. Ye Liu, Reader in International Development at King's College, London. China says it will play a constructive role to promote a peaceful solution for the border dispute between Thailand and Cambodia. The Chinese Foreign Ministry facilitated a meeting with officials from both countries in Shanghai today. Vice Foreign Minister Sun Weidong attended that informal consultation. The ministry says both sides reiterated their commitment to the ceasefire. Beijing has pledged to maintain close communication with Cambodia and Thailand and stand ready to continue working with Malaysia and other nations in the region. China says today's meeting was its latest diplomatic effort to defuse border tensions between the two ASEAN members. 5 days of clashes between the Southeast Asian neighbours ended in a ceasefire on Monday. Well, that truce between Thailand and Cambodia, though, is under strain amid allegations of sporadic skirmishes. The Thai Foreign Ministry has accused Cambodian forces of a, quote, flagrant violation of the ceasefire. Thailand's military reported at least 2 incidents of fresh clashes involving small arms and grenades last night in an offensive that lasted until this morning. Cambodia has denied breaching the ceasefire and said there have been no armed clashes. Foreign Ministry attachés from major powers and ASEAN member countries were at the border to observe the truce. And these include diplomats from 13 countries, including the US and China. The foreign observers were briefed by a Cambodian general in the presence of Thai troops who had previously crossed into Cambodian territory. The attachés also inspected damage at the closed Cambodian border checkpoint. Well, the fragile truce is also the focus of a special CNA correspondent podcast. Teresa Tang speaks to Jack Board and Leong Wai Kit as they cover developments on the ground on both sides of the border. And you can catch the episode and the other behind-the-scenes conversations with our global team of reporters on our podcast, CNA Correspondent. It's available now on our website, CNA or Me Listen apps, as well as on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Well, that's Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime, cna.asia, also Facebook and YouTube. Bye-bye.